Hello, in just a moment, the press preview as we take a look at the morning papers. But first, let's update you on our top stories here this evening. And French police have carried out a series of raids in Paris after a suspected terror attack at the Louvre Museum. A 29-year-old Egyptian suspect was shot and seriously injured after attacking soldiers with a machete. A Royal Marine has admitted hoarding weapons and explosives for use by dissident Irish Republicans. And the US has imposed new sanctions on Iran, targeting Tehran's ballistic missile programme. Hello there, you're watching Sky News and the press preview. In the next half hour, we'll be seeing what's making the headlines with Matt Kelly, editor of The New European, and the director of the Institute of Ideas, Claire Fox. So hello to both of you. So let's take a look at what's on the front pages then. And the Eye leads with the attack at the Louvre in Paris, with a warning from the French president that the threat of terrorism is here to stay. The Mirror has more on the energy supplier npower's plans to raise its bills for customers by an average of £109. The Express has that same story, calling the increase a kick in the teeth for families. The Guardian claims Theresa May's attempts to act as a diplomatic bridge between President Trump and the European Union has been rejected by EU leaders at a summit in Malta. The FT's Weekend Edition reports on Donald Trump's plans to dismantle the landmark Dodd-Frank reforms on the US banking sector, a move which opponents claim could lead to another Wall Street crash. The Times carries an investigation which alleges that Shadow International Trade Secretary Barry Gardner accepted Chinese state money to fund his staff costs. He denies any wrongdoing. The government's push to build 1 million new homes will soon mean property developers will have to start work much more quickly or risk losing their planning permission. That's according to The Telegraph. The Mail says the current vegetable shortage has led some supermarkets to ban sales of some goods online. And The Sun has a story about David Beckham. So let's chat through those front pages and some of the stories inside as well with Matt Kelly and Claire Fox. And you've chosen The Guardian to kick off with. And this focuses on Theresa May's visit to Malta today to meet at an informal EU summit with other EU leaders. And her offer to act as a bridge between those EU countries and Donald Trump. How did that go down?
Not so great, according to The Guardian. And I think quite credibly, because there's plenty of quotes coming out, direct quotes from European leaders that are frosty in nature. President Hollande of France is saying that they don't need a bridge. They're perfectly capable of dealing with America on their own terms. Very interesting point there that hadn't occurred to me until this evening, is that once we leave the European Union, France will be the only permanent member of the Security Council that is also a member of the European Union. So you see a great strengthening of France's hand in international security and international dealing. Lithuania's leader, Dalia, and you know how to pronounce it, don't you, Anna? No.
You promised you wouldn't put me on the spot. I'm not going to help you out here.
Okay. She said we don't need a bridge with the Americans because we can communicate with them on Twitter, of course. So loads of frost in the atmosphere, I think. Theresa May, I think, must be wondering whether she played her cards as well as she could have done in rushing to the side of Donald Trump so early on in the relationship. It appeared, I think, to be an act of almost craven nature, and I think there's a lot of people feeling a little bit nauseous in Britain now at the idea of this open invitation to Donald Trump to come and ride with the Queen in a golden state coach, and people are saying, shouldn't we just wait and see what this guy's like a bit? Shouldn't we be a little bit more self-possessed and have a little bit more self-esteem and not be so pathetic in how we go begging to the Americans for a trade deal to get us out of the hole we've dug ourselves in with Brexit?
I have a different view. Surprise. I mean, I think it's absolutely no surprise, by the way, that the EU leaders said, no, thank you very much, Theresa May, for your kind offer of being the bridge. I mean, how she thought that was going to work. I mean, that was never happening. But I think, there's a number of different things. I don't think that it was kind of craven of Theresa May to go to America. I think that it is, you see, regardless of what we think of Donald Trump, he is the President of the United States, and anybody, Merkel included, by the way, or anyone else in Europe, has to. It's not a question of let's give him a bit of time and see if we like him. he is the President of the United States. And I also think that the visit to the UK, it's neither here nor there, I think what's been really horrifying to me has been all those people signing a petition trying to ban him, you know, which is just mad. We don't like him because he bans people, so what will we do? We'll ban him, and so on and so forth. But I think there's...
But the petition is not necessarily to ban him, it's to stop him having all the pomp and circumstance of,
yes,
of a state
because
visit.
it might upset the Queen. So the thing that we should bear in mind before we start lecturing everybody else about democracy is that the Queen is unelected, right? Is an unelected head of state. Donald Trump can trump her on that because he's an elected leader of in a democratic world. And it doesn't matter that we don't find him classy enough to fit in with our pomp and ceremony.
Yes and
I mean,
no.
that's completely...
I agree with some of the sentiment there. This offer of a full-blown state visit has never been offered to a president this early in his career, in history. Never. So,
but Britain's never been in this position either of coming out of an organisation like the EU or a group of countries, and there is a pragmatic imperative, some would say, to do deals.
I think it's the only rational explanation. We are going as supplicants to the White House.
I don't see it like that. And particularly, but I think it's also worth noting, and this is of course where the debate about whether to be in or out of the EU and what's come out of the Malta summit as well, because you've got there, you know, calls for greater common cooperation together, encourage common defence. We have to stand by each other and all agree on everything, and we have our destiny in our own hands as Europe. And obviously what happened with the Brexit vote was people said, well, no, we want to have our own destiny in our own hands, not as decided by a Malta summit of European leaders. And so I think that's where the tension is.
But there's a core reality here that they've got a big say in our future, and they are now looking at Theresa May over in America, not just offering a state visit, but saying how we align ourselves with Donald Trump, how we think he's a great thing, how Britain and America have an opportunity to start to lead the world again. How do you think those guys in Europe feel listening to all of that? They're not going to be saying, OK, come and help us be a Brit.
She's also implying that she can be a temperate influence or a tempering influence, saying, look at the agreement I got on him being 100% behind NATO, for example.
I think that is what her boast is, and I mean, I'm not saying that that's wrong or right. But the thing that I suppose I get a bit nervous about is, is that I think that the whole point about the Brexit vote was to say we ourselves can now determine our future and have relationships with all of these European countries. It's this kind of EU bloc, the United States of Europe, that I think is the real attack on democracy. But I would just think it's important for us to note that there was more going on in Malta than kind of Merkel and everybody telling May off. And there's things that happened in Malta that we actually wouldn't agree with and that we now don't have to put up with. And I think that's reasonable.
OK.
That's what we've just got onto that. I've just said, I don't see... You run a paper that you've already admitted in an earlier discussion might sometimes only see things one way, and I'm just reminding you there is another way of seeing.
OK,
well, of course.
We can get into that another time. We must whiz on, or we'll get no more stories in before the break. You've picked out a story inside the Times. We're sticking with Donald Trump, and they've got a story here suggesting that there was a White House order that women should dress like women.
Yeah, well, it's interesting. In the room before we came on, we were talking about this and we said, well, that's quite an interesting story. And then Claire quite rightly said, yeah, but is it true? Where's the source? You know, and we've got down here this a male White House employee told Axios, which is a Washington media group, that Trump's insisted that female employees, quotes, dress like women. I think we're both agreed on this. Dangerous territory here, you know, because it fits the bill. Yeah, OK, you know, it's certainly something you could imagine Donald Trump, given all his history about misogyny and the nasty things he said about women in the past, fits the bill. But the evidence for this is very thin, and there's your headline, White House edict on ladylike attire, expressed as a genuine news story. Who knows?
This is in the Times, and it's next to, and this is the point that's interesting, it's next to a story about Kellyanne Conway, the White House special counsellor, who basically kind of, in the midst of having, you know, making an announcement, made up a massacre, talking about the Bowling Green massacre. Now, she misspoke, she's apologised, but she nonetheless cited an Iraqi massacre in Bowling Green, which never happened. And, you know, it's kind of caused a furore. So everybody has spent all day saying, oh, you see, post-fact, fake news, Trumpites. And then, without even thinking about it, certainly in social media, everyone has been happily saying, yeah, Trump's telling women to dress like women. So I've been trying to find out if it's true. It's now in the Times, but I still can't actually see anything then, you know, anonymous insider White House, you know. And
yeah,
you think,
interesting to hear if we do hear more about that.
So it's journalistic
in the coming
standards, I think
days.
we have to be careful of.
Yeah.
If they play fast and loose with their standards, doesn't mean that we should in response, just because it fits a caricature of our view on Trump.
OK, let's move on to a story inside the Mail about pensions. There we go. You'll have to work until you're 74. This is young people.
Yeah.
Why will people have to wait longer before they can get their pension?
Well, we are sitting on a pension time bomb in this country. I was talking to somebody with a great deal of information about this recently, and the suggestion is that at some point the government is going to have to legislate to shave off a big chunk of people's pensions going forward, because otherwise, potentially, big businesses are going to go under. So here's the OBR, the Office for Budget Responsibility, forecasting how in tune with our greater lifespan as we go on. And fascinating facts, a male kid today born will live to be 79 on average, and a girl to be 83. They're saying by 2036, we'll be living to be 100 by then. So you can see the problem. And of course, the answer is you're going to have to work longer, and you're going to have to pay as well for an awful lot more ill health as people get older and older and more decrepit.
I guess, though, the argument is that they'll be fitter at that age than previous generations.
Yeah, I mean, it's difficult because nobody wants to leave people in penury, and people who are kind of waiting to leave horrible jobs, there's a state pension. But I also think we have to be realistic and recognise that if people are living until their hundreds, retiring at 64 and 65 can be demoralising.
And imagine how many telegrams the Queen's going to have to write.
But actually, they've still got a lot of life to work. And so in that sense, the positive side of this story is that people are living longer.
Yes.
Yeah. OK. And on a positive note,
of course,
we shall pause. Lots more to come after the break, though, including could Brexit impact the opera? We'll be taking a closer look at that. Welcome back to the press preview, where we're taking a look at the morning papers with Matt Kelly, editor of the New European, and the director at the Institute of Ideas, Claire Fox. And you've picked out a story inside the Mail to kick off this section. Explain to us what it's about.
Well, I say this, you know, walking on eggshells, even talking about a story like this. But what's happened is that somebody's been taken to court for and charged with harassment and a hate crime and for hate speech for saying "all right, geezer," but effectively misgendering somebody. And the reason why I've raised it is because I think this has got no place in law. The thing and it's obviously to do with the whole question about gender, and people do feel very nervous about it. It's actually mentioned down the bottom there, where we've had doctors told this week that they should now not refer to expectant mothers, but use inclusive language, pregnant people. People don't quite know. And I thought it was just interesting that the person who was charged in a court said, everyone had the right to... I thought everybody had the right to greet people. I didn't expect my life to be sabotaged because of saying, you know, hello to somebody, effectively using the wrong language. What's also interesting is that in this court case, and this just shows you how one-sided it gets, the person who was actually the victim, as it were, Joanne Gullen, who's the victim, said, come on, tell me what you've called me, big boy. You're not such a big man now, are you? Are you scared of a tranny? But of course, this is the victim, so I actually think that's quite aggressive, offensive exchange. Yeah. So what you get is this nervousness, and I just think she could go nowhere near the courts. It shows you that hate speech is very subjective, and I think we are in danger of not being able to interact with each other without threatening to take people to court for hate crime, and it's dangerous.
And the gentleman's conviction was quashed, it says.
Yes, sorry,
here.
I didn't,
yeah.
Yes.
OK, let's move on to another story that's inside the Mail. This is George Osborne, isn't it? Don't overdo it, George, is the headline. He says he's working hard for Britain.
Yeah.
Because he's got lots of new jobs, essentially.
I mean, I think, you know, no wonder people look at politicians and the political class and think, what are they talking about? What are they on? You know, and when they talk about the just about managings and all of this and their deep-rooted connection with working people and ordinary people in Britain, and then you see George Osborne, he's now got, 4 jobs.
It says 5 in the headline.
Yeah, four and an MP.
And he's an MP.
So
he's with BlackRock. He's getting 200 grand from BlackRock. He's made 620 grand from talking around big banks and corporations, not bad. He's a Kissinger fellow. We don't know how much he gets paid for that. He gets 75 grand for being an MP. Well, he can't be a full-time MP and do all of the other stuff as well. So I just think, you know, people acting like this must realise that ordinary people look at them and think, you're having a laugh, mate. You really are taking the mickey. And then we've got our friend David Cameron, who, in my no doubt disproportionately weighted view, has absolutely brought this country to the brink of catastrophe. Anyway, David Cameron there, messing about on a camera with Arnold Schwarzenegger, making this social media video and ending it with, "I'll be back." Well, you won't, mate, I can promise you. We're done.
And just in the midst of all this, of course, I hold David Cameron responsible for going back on his word, having organised the EU referendum and saying he would stick by the word of the people, and then kind of flouncing off and throwing his toys out the pram, and actually behaving incredibly irresponsibly as a Prime Minister, when I think he should have seen through in those initial weeks after the EU referendum. But anyway, obviously Schwarzenegger, to bring us back to Trump, because everything comes back to Trump, if not Brexit, is obviously the person who's now running the American version of The Apprentice. And then we have Cameron hanging out with him. So there you go.
OK, let's move on to the story inside the Times. You were asking the question about whether Brexit was having an impact on opera. What's the answer?
Well, look, I get wound up about about Brexit bad news. Even I can't get too wound up about this one. Opera companies around Britain apparently are terrified that they won't be able to call on stand-ins across Europe if their leading ladies suddenly get a sore throat at some point. As Brexit bad news goes, I can cope with it.
But aren't there wider issues for the arts generally, though?
Yes, there are, but one of the things that you should know is that for years, for the last couple of years, I've been involved in a campaign, supported a campaign about allowing artists to come in on visas. And whilst in the EU, there have been severe visa restrictions on artists coming into the UK. So, you know, as it happens, there's been a campaign, and I think that artists should be able to come here. I think we should make it easier for people to come in those situations. And I'm glad we're out the EU. That should not mean that we stop people coming in. I actually quite like the opera, but it's the idea that opera's in crisis, blame Brexit.
You prima donna, you.
Anyway.
You'd rather stay in and watch the press preview, wouldn't you?
I'd rather go to the opera now.
Any
I'm
day
more
of the week.
enthused.
Got yourself in the mood. Well, we're all out of time. Matt Kelly and Claire Fox, lovely to see you. Thanks very much indeed.